was Solomon's wealth and power a fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Kings on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 20 to 34. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 20. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Kings chapter 4, beginning at verse 20. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. So Solomon reigned over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Now Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cors of fine flour, 60 cors of meal, 10 fatted oxen, 20 oxen from the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl. For he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river, from Tiphsah even to Gaza, namely over all the kings on this side of the river, and he had peace on every side all around him. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, each man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan as far as Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots, and 12,000 horsemen. And these governors, each man in his month, provided food for King Solomon, and for all who came to King Solomon's table. There was no lack in their supply. They also brought barley and straw to the proper place for the horses and steeds, each man according to his charge. And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding, and largeness of heart like the sand of the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Chalcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. And his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Also he spoke of trees, from the cedar tree of Lebanon, even to the hyssop that springs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and of fish. And men of all nations, from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon. In this chapter, we have an overview of the greatness of Solomon's kingdom. Back in Genesis, Abraham was promised that his descendants would be like the sands of the sea, and that they would the seashore, and that they would possess the land of Canaan, from the river Euphrates to the river of Egypt in the southern Negev, not the Nile River as some think. Yet Abraham never lived to see this come to pass. He had Isaac, and Abraham lived to see Isaac have 2 sons, Esau and Jacob, hardly the nation that could be described as innumerable. However, Abraham's faith in God never wavered, knowing that God would accomplish his promise. And about 500 years later, Israel left Egyptian slavery, about 2 million people strong. A lot of people for that time, but a number of people that would only get bigger, as we saw at the end of 2 Samuel with the census of David. However, up until the days of David, the land promise had yet to be fulfilled. Sure, Israel conquered the immediate land of Canaan, but their borders really started in the north at Dan, near the top of the Sea of Galilee, and ended in Beersheba in southern Judah, a far cry from the expanse of land that God promised. But this wasn't God's fault. It was Israel's. Back when they entered the promised land, God told them to fully conquer the peoples of the land, yet Israel took what they thought was the easy way out and simply lived among these peoples largely. This, of course, wasn't the easy way out, for the past 400 years have been filled with war and strife for Israel. Even during the days of David, there was war throughout his reign in order to gain or hold new land. That is one of the reasons David couldn't build God a temple, leaving that to Solomon. But it is largely due to the hard work of David that Solomon was able to enjoy the fruits of that labor, which is the territory and influence that came from those wars. And so it was ultimately in the days of Solomon that the promise to Abraham was fulfilled, not only concerning number of people, but land. For Solomon reigned either directly or indirectly over the peoples of the land from the Euphrates River in the far north to the river of Egypt in the southern Negev. And not only would Solomon reign over this large swath of land, his reign, at least in the beginning, was marked as one of peace and prosperity. Solomon became one of, if not the richest king in the area, as was seen through the taxes collected, all of his provisions of food that he had, as well as the number of chariots and horsemen that he possessed. In collecting up horses for himself, Solomon actually disobeyed Deuteronomy 17, verse 16 concerning this. What was the purpose of such a command in Deuteronomy? So that the king wouldn't trust in the strength of his army for victory, but on God. Solomon disregarded this, though, and later in life, when his heart failed following God fully, he couldn't trust in these armies to save him, for God wasn't with him, showing us again that God's will cannot be subverted by man, no matter what we do or how strong we seemingly become. But Solomon wasn't the only one to enjoy peace and wealth, for it is said that all Israel enjoyed these things. This would be a short period of peace, however, as late in Solomon's life, war and strife would return, ultimately leading to the permanent breakup of the kingdom. For now, though, all is well in Israel and Judah. As far as the wisdom of Solomon went, it is said that he was wiser than all of his contemporaries, just as God said. The names of Ethan the Ezrahite and Heman we should make note of, as we will see these men writing a couple of the Psalms in the book of Psalms. Solomon is said to have composed 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs, some of which are contained in the book of Psalms and Proverbs. His wisdom is also found in the book of Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. But Solomon's wisdom wasn't just known by those living in Israel. It was known by men of other nations who came to hear it, as we will see later on in this book. Now there are some scholars who scoff at Solomon being described here as being so rich, powerful, and wise due to seemingly a lack of evidence in the historical record. To that I say, the book of 1 Kings is evidence to it, and a lack of further evidence does not falsify the account of the Bible. Just because some might expect to find some other evidence doesn't mean that we won't eventually find such evidence, and it doesn't mean the Bible is somehow not telling the truth here. The land of Israel has undergone a countless number of wars over the centuries that may have destroyed such evidence, but that shouldn't shake the faith of a Christian, for we have the Bible account of this time period, and that should suffice for us to have faith that God is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. In our next lesson, we will begin to see Solomon's preparations for building the temple, so we invite you back for that lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 to 7, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.